Hey everyone, Urban Fish Keeper here. In today's video, I'm just going to run you through first foods or fry foods and what I use and the kind of cultures and how I set them up and get them ready. I've got a couple of blue-black rams at the moment that have spawned and laid eggs all over the gravel, which in itself is not a problem because normally I prefer to let the parents raise the fry and look after the eggs. I'm not a commercial establishment. I don't breed for profit, I breed for fun. So if I can, I let the parents do all the work. But it just made me realize that I need to make sure that I've got all my foods in order. The other thing is probably worth just mentioning as well. I'm not sure if you can see them behind me. But my discus pair have spawned again. And I don't know, their timing or my timing is bad because it seems to happen every time I want to do a video or I want to spend some time in this room, they decide to spawn. They're not mad about having me around them or, and moving around when they've got eggs. So anyway, last time they ate them, so we'll see what happens this time around. All right, let's get started. So you would have seen in my better video, I mentioned the different foods that I use, especially for stuff like bedders that are really tiny. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run you through the foods that I make sure that I have available and how I go preparing them. So first and foremost is let's get started on my kryptonite, the one that I really struggle with, which is infusoria. So the way I do my infusoria, and again, for every 10 I do, I get one that works right. Is I take some green leaves, in this case, just some lettuce, whatever other little green leaves I get out the salad bag. I put them in a clean jar. Over that I pour some boiling water, just to wilten and soften the leaves. I leave that one side to cool down. And once that's cooled down, I then fill up the rest of this jar with aquarium water. Now the aquarium water that you need to use is try and select aquarium water from a well-established aquarium, preferably one that has plants and snails in it, and then use that water to fill up the rest of the jar. That then goes on the windowsill. The green leaves and so forth in the jar start breaking down. That causes a bacterial boom. The infusoria in the water that you've already put in from your aquarium starts eating the bacteria, and so your infusoria culture starts booming from there. What I also do is I just use a piece of paper towel that I then put over the top of the jar. Let me just move it out here so you can see what I'm doing. Just put it over the top of the jar, just with an elastic band, and then I just leave that on the windowsill, and that's it. And that's how I do my infusoria. The next one up is vinegar eel. The great thing about vinegar eel is it's not one of those cultures that you have to continuously redo or continuously, start a new one because the other one's gone off. These cultures of mine have been running now for probably, 4 months or so, maybe 5 months. No, probably about 4 months. And that's still young when it comes to vinegar eel cultures. What I do is I normally have 3 running at any one time. I have the feeding culture. I have the culture that I use to supplement the feeding one. And then I have my primary culture, which I just keep in a steamer jar or a steamer container, which is like a Tupperware container. And I leave that in the cupboard. And that is my primary one, that if anything happens to these two, I can restart my culture from that one again. All right, vinegar eel, straightforward. First of all, you need an existing culture. So you need to get from another hobbyist, or you could probably get some of it online or somebody to post your little culture of vinegar eel. You need some apple cider vinegar. This is the one that I use. And yeah, in Australia, we just get it from either Coles or Woolies. And you need apple. Most people run a 50-50 mix, so 50% the vinegar and 50% water. I run about a 70-30, so 70% vinegar and 30% water, and I used aged water. So aged water is water that I've left in a bucket for at least 24 hours or longer, and I use that then to complete the mix. Then it's straightforward. You just take from your seeding mix, pour some of it into your new one, add in a couple of slices of apple and leave it, and the vinegar eel culture will multiply and grow. Feeding vinegar eels, there's two methods that get used. The one method is, or I should say two common methods, because ideally what you don't want to do is use pipette or something and siphon this vinegar water out and then put that vinegar water in your aquariums to feed your fry. The two methods that commonly get used is either the coffee paper filters or the cotton wool method. I use the cotton wool method. I don't like the coffee filter method. I find I lose too many and it just doesn't work well for me. The principle behind it is you pour the liquid through the coffee filter, then rinse it out under some clean water, and then just put that coffee filter in your aquarium, just shake it off in the aquarium and all the worms will come off into the aquarium. The method I use is the Cottonmole method, and this is my feeding jar or feeding bottle. When I'm ready or I need them, what I do is I use from the other one, the other one that I've got running. I fill up this bottle till the neck area. Once it's up into the neck, I then put in some cotton wool reasonably firmly, and so that the cotton wool is touching the vinegar. And then on top of that, I then just pour some, with a pipette, I just pour in some fresh water. And what will happen is the vinegar eels, wanting to get to the air, will make their way through the cotton wool into the fresh water. And then every day all I do is I use a pipette, I siphon out or take out the water out the top, which is the fresh water. I feed it to the fry, and then I just top it up with some more fresh water. And that's how I run the vinegar eels. Really straightforward, simple to do. What I will add though is, I'm going through these reasonably quickly. If there's anyone in particular that you'd like me to spend more time on, please put it in the comments below and I'll have a look at that, and I can make one particularly on, make one on that particular culture, on that type of food. All right, the next one is one that I have in my aquarium room all the time. I'm never without it, and the reason for it, and that's microworm. The reason for that is I'm running low on brine shrimp. I've hatched out a lot of brine shrimp. I'm on to day 2, and I'm running a little bit low on how much brine shrimp I can harvest. I then add some microworm to that. Right, so the way I do it is straightforward. Now, I thought that I had more of these containers lying around, but unfortunately I didn't. So I'm going to show you with these food containers, which is the 500 ml, and again, Coles, Woolworths, you can get it from there. The technique is the same in both, and the quantities I use is the same in both. All right, so I'll just run you through it really quickly. Normally in that, I'm just going to do it in here. So for the microworms, you need some oats, and this is just rolled oats. Again, Woolworths, Coles. All right, and for this one I do use a measuring cup, so just that I get my quantities reasonably okay. In this size container I'd probably use half a cup, but I'm going with just a cup. Okay, just a cup of the oats, and then to that you add a cup of water. Now, of course, I'm so well organized, I haven't got a cup of water. Just give me a second to grab a cup of water. Right, so a cup of water, pour that in. The trick that I found with microworms is their culture base, in this case the oats, needs to be reasonably wet. I found that when I make it too dry, I just don't get good results. All right, now what I do with that solution, you can see it's it's quite wet. Cup of oats, cups of water. I leave that for about 45 minutes, an hour. And that just allows the oats to absorb the water. Once that's done, I then give that a really good mix. And that's what I'm doing here. And this is one that I prepared about an hour ago. Okay, and you'll see you get that like porridgey, like you'd expect oats when it's cooked. That's what it looks like. Okay, and it's quite a loose mix, but it's not, there's not water laying all over it. So that's the consistency. Okay, then let's get that out of there. The other thing you need is some dry yeast, and that's the one that I use. Again, Coles or Woolies. Dry yeast, and you just want to give a good sprinkling over the top. Okay. Not too sure if you're going to be able to see that in the camera, but some dry yeast over the top. All right. And then what I do is I just mix a bit of that dry yeast in. I don't stir it vigorously into the mixture. I just mix it a little bit off the top. Okay. And then what you also need, obviously, is you need an existing culture that's running. And then what I do is, and you'll also notice I've got a little stick that I put in mine, because the microworms climb up it, and then I can just wipe that off with a little paintbrush and put that into the aquarium. I normally put in fresh water first and then across with a pipette into the aquarium. All right, so for the seeding culture, what I do is I just take off the top. And I just grab some of that off the top. Doesn't have to be a lot. Okay. And I just rub that over the top. I don't mix that in. I just rub it over the top. Okay. Again, as I've said, ideally you want those kind of containers as opposed to the one that I'm using yet, but I'm just showing you the method. Okay, once that's done, the other thing I then do is I just use, because you need some breathing holes, you can do whatever you like, use a little knife or a little drill bit or something. I just use a fork, an old fork, with a lighter. I just heat this up. And then once that's heated up, I just use that to create the holes. All right. And once that's done, seal it up, put it on the shelf, and that takes care of microworms. I keep on feeling like I want to say mealworm, but yeah, microworms. Okay, so just to sum up for the microworms, you need some rolled oats, some yeast, and I use a ratio of 1 to 1. 1 cup of rolled oats to 1 cup of water. Okay. The next one that I have running constantly in my fish room is brine shrimp. And brine shrimp is one of those where people have good hatches, they don't have good hatches. Mine is reasonably consistent. I don't necessarily use the best quality eggs because I buy a tin at a time. I pour out what I use on a daily, not on a daily basis, but that I keep in my fish room. I pour out something to this little airtight steamer container, and I use from this. And the rest of it I leave in a airtight container in my fridge. Now, The ratio that I use for brine shrimp is a 1-to-1 ratio, as in 1 tablespoon. So 1 tablespoon of salt to 1 liter of water. 1 tablespoon of salt to 1 liter of water. Now, a normal tablespoon would be probably something like that. Okay. When I put in, I'm normally putting in a tablespoon like that. So it's a little bit extra salt. Now the reason I do that is, and I'll run you quickly through the method I use for feeding the brine shrimp, is that I'm constantly, I normally have brine shrimp running for about 2 days, 2 to 3 days that I use from one batch. But I'm adding fresh water to it every time because I'm pouring back what I've cleaned off and I haven't fed. So that's why I put in a little bit of extra salt. The other thing is the salt that I use. There's nothing wrong with you using normal natural salt that you can buy at like Woolworths or Coles. The one's got no chemicals, the coarse salt little packets. Me personally, I prefer to use Aquarium Salt for marine aquariums. So it's, as you can see, it's like a fine salt, but it's, if you go to any aquarium store that sell marine fish, they'll have Aquarium Salt for marine tanks to make up the water for the fish, and that's the salt that I use. Look, it's got other elements and additives in it to make it as close to the natural seawater for keeping marine aquarium fish. So that's the salt that I use. And again, the ratio, 1 tablespoon, 1 liter of water. Right. In this room, I don't heat my brine shrimp. So at the moment, and we're in April now, it takes probably around about 28 to 36 hours, probably closer to 36 hours for my brine shrimp to hatch, because the temperature in here is probably around about 24 degrees or so. When it's warmer, obviously it goes a bit quicker. Now for harvesting the brine shrimp, the method I use is as follows. Now whether you use something like a Zeiss blender where you just open up the tap and it runs out, or you use a hanging method, a little plastic bottle where you siphon out, or you've got a little tap at the bottom that you pour out. The biggest challenge for most people when it comes to feeding brine shrimp is the amount of the non-hatched eggs or egg shells, or those little eggs that end up in your brine shrimp that you want to feed your fish. Now for really tiny stuff, when you're feeding brine shrimp, my opinion is that it can cause blockages, and it's not good to get those unhatched eggs or any of the eggshell or anything in while you're feeding. So what I do is I either siphon or tap off, whichever method you use, brine shrimp water into this little plastic container. Right, so probably about a quarter, and then it's full of all the nice little pink gold. I then pour that, obviously go to a basin, I then pour that through the strainer. Now this strainer I got probably 30 years ago from a friend of mine that also used to breed fish, and it was just homemade, but if I'm not mistaken, the mesh on here is like a 10 micron mesh or something. Anyway, you can use whatever little mesh you want to use and for straining. So I pour that mixture in here. I then under a tap rinse it all off. I turn this upside down, fresh water on top to wash all the brine shrimp out, and this will probably have a quarter water, fresh water and brine shrimp. I then put that down on one of my aquariums under lights, and I leave that for about 10-15 minutes for any of the unhatched eggs or eggs or whatever to settle, and I then use a pipette to feed out. But what that means is that 99% of the time I'm siphoning out brine shrimp that's off the bottom because they come up to the light, It means I'm also not getting eggshells or anything else, or unhatched eggs in with the feeding. Sure, you're going to get occasionally get a couple, but 99% of the time you're working with brine shrimp that have been washed in fresh water. You're feeding from fresh water, and you can siphon out of here or use a pipette to take it as you need. When I'm finished, whatever is left, I take this and pour this back into my brine shrimp hatchery. In my case, it's a Zeiss blender, and then follow the process later that evening or the next morning. When it comes to brine shrimp, I'm feeding twice a day. All right, and that's basically it. So those are the foods that I used to feed my fry. Now, depending on the size of your fry, if you're doing things like betters, you want to start off with infusoria because they're so tiny. And then you've got your vinegar eels, your micro worms, and your brine shrimp. If you're breeding something that's maybe a little bit bigger, stuff like discus, once you take them away from the parents, you've already been feeding them on brine shrimp probably for a week or so. Well, I do anyway. I don't move them until I've seen them actually eating brine shrimp while they're still with the parents. So they go straight, they don't go through any of this, they go to brine shrimp. But saying that, they will, once they've moved, again, if I'm running low, they will take the micro worm as well. And then you've got, the fish in between that, you may only need to give some vinegar eel, or you can go straight micro worm and then go on to brine shrimp. So these are the ones that's really good to have. There is another food that breeders use instead of infusoria, and I'll probably do a video separate to that, and that's using egg yolk, the yellow of the egg. And it's one of those that you have to be very careful about how you use that as a first food, because it can foul the water really quickly. I've seen methods of the way people do it. Some of it I think is good, others I think you run the risk of fouling really quickly. The way I use egg yolk when I have to is I use it a piece inside material, and I squeeze it or work it through the material, and it becomes very fine. It's like powder in the water, really fine powder. So, but I'll do something separate on the egg, and I'll probably do that if I decide to pull a batch of the ram eggs, because that's really good in the beginning to use that with the rams, is the egg yolk. Obviously infusoria is first prize, but if you, like me, and struggle with infusoria, then you have to use something like the egg. Now, I, for instance, will not use egg on betters, and the reason for that is because the betters, their tanks, I'm normally not filtering when there's fry in it, and I'm relying on the infusoria and all the other little bits and pieces in that aquarium to get them through that first week or so, then combined with vinegar eel, after day 3 or so, and then moving on to microworm. So I don't use egg at all, because I think for them there's a high risk of fouling and causing problems. For stuff like some of the dwarf cichlids, so I've done that with a Via, Apistogramma Via. I've used egg while they were with the parents, and that worked well. Again, that tank is being filtered. I'm using a pipette. I'm using very small quantities just to get it in there initially, and then it's straight on to microworm and brine shrimp. With rams, different story. My previous blue-black spawn, where my male died, and I've got a new male now, that's why they're spawning again. I left the fry with the parents, and I think I've got about eight fry or so out, and they're a nice size. They're in this tank here behind me. Again, with them, it was also, they were in a tank with the parents, and I used a bit of egg through the material method, and then feeding with a pipette. Once they, and that was just for a week or so, a couple of days, because they were getting infusoria and everything else in that aquarium. Then it's onto microworm and brine shrimp, and in the case of the Via, when they were big enough, I moved them into a little Zeiss breeding container, and I could feed them the brine shrimp. In the case of the blue-black rams, once the male had died, I pulled those babies out, and you know, then it was microworm and brine shrimp. Anyway, all right, guys. So if you'd like to know more information on any of this, or more information on how I reared a particular fish, you know, any of the ones that I'm currently breeding, and that's the betters, the blue-black rams, and the discus at the moment, put it in the comment below, and I'm happy to do a video just on those. Any other questions do ask. Once again, thank you for watching. I appreciate those of you that have subscribed, and I also really appreciate all the comments. So have a good week, take it easy if you can, and stay safe. See you.